Hi guys, so today's video is about the key events in the Second Crusade, which was between 1145 to 1149. So here is a brief timeline of the key events of the Second Crusade, and it would be really beneficial to write this down because it would really help you a lot. And there were three main battles in the Second Crusade. First was the Battle of Dorylaeum in 1147, the next was Mount Cadmus in 1148, and the last was the Siege of Damascus in 1148. And the Siege of Damascus was the most important in my opinion. So here's some background information on the 1097 Battle of Dorylaeum, which was in the First Crusade, and this just sets the scene for the Battle of Dorylaeum that happened in 1147. So it was a Crusader/Christian success, and the Seljuk Turks attacked the Crusader force, which was under Bohemond, and the Crusaders split into two groups to minimize logistical problems, which shows how logistics and leadership was better in the First Crusade, which may be a reason why the Second Crusade was a failure. And the Seljuk horse archers couldn't break through the Crusader plate and mail armor, and leadership from Bohemond provided motivation and discipline for the men, which allowed them to weather out the 6-hour attack until reinforcements arrived. And this is just a quote that Bohemond said, and it would be really good to write in essays and in your notes. And reinforcements under Raymond arrived and the Seljuks retreated. And women played a significant part in this battle because they supported the men who were holding their defense lines, because they would bring them essentials such as food and water so that they wouldn't collapse and that they would be able to stand for that long. So the battle, here's a timeline of the brief key events in the Battle of Dorylaeum 1147. So in 1145, Zengi dies, and initial relations between Manuel and Conrad III are positive when Crusaders arrive in Constantinople. Manuel is concerned about the French and Germans arriving together, so he encourages the Germans to sail across the Bosphorus, splitting the Crusader army up. Manuel sends a guide to suggest that the Germans travel along the coast rather than inland to avoid Muslim territory, but Conrad changes his mind and heads to Dorylaeum. Conrad splits his forces outside of Dorylaeum to look for supplies, and Seljuks use hit-and-run tactics throughout the battle as the German forces retreat to the coast. Therefore, only a tenth of the German forces arrived at Nicaea. And what factors from this are contributing to the failure of the Second Crusade? So poor leadership from Conrad, because he decides to ignore Byzantine advice and travel across Seljuk territory. Also, he splits up his forces, and this shows how he was arrogant, because kings usually don't like being told what to do. Also, there is disunity between the French and German forces because the Germans forge ahead of the French. Therefore, they don't arrive in the Holy Land at the same time. And an alternative perspective is that Conrad is able to make good alliances and get Byzantine support, but he pushes the Germans a bit faster than expected to. So, what happened at Mount Cadmus in 1148? So there was good relations between the French and Manuel I initially, but there was worry about Louis VII and Roger II of Sicily because they had an alliance. And Byzantines spread rumors about the success of the Germans to encourage the French to get moving across the Bosphorus, and Louis VII arrives in Nicaea and realizes that that was a lie, and Conrad III was wounded and only had 10% of his army left due to the mistake he made at the Battle of Dorylaeum. And combined Crusader forces then take the coastal route advised by the Byzantines initially, and Conrad III and his men go back to Constantinople to treat Conrad's wounds, leaving Louis VII and the French alone to fight. And the French met the Seljuks at a meander valley, and this results in a Crusader victory, and the French had to march through Mount Cadmus to get to the next port city. The French column had to stretch thin, almost 10 kilometers long, and the French vanguard rushes ahead and sets up a camp. Mount Cadmus was a failure in the end. And lastly, the siege of Damascus in 1148 was a pivotal moment that ultimately led to the failure of the Second Crusade. So the failure of the siege was due to military incompetence and led to the unity of the Crusaders being shattered as a result because they were not confident after that. So the Crusaders, led by Louis VII of France, Conrad III of Germany, and Baldwin III of Jerusalem, had initially planned to target Edessa, but their focus had now shifted to Damascus, and they planned to attack Damascus from the west. The siege began with heavy fighting, but the dense terrain made movement very difficult, so they had to go somewhere else. So on the 27th of July, they shifted their attack to the eastern side, believing that it was less fortified and that they were able to get into the city. However, this was a disaster as this area had a lack of food and water. Furthermore, internal conflicts among the Crusaders left Crusader leaders weakened their resolve because there was disputes over who would rule Damascus if they won the battle. The ruler of Damascus called for reinforcements from Nur al-Din Zengi, who arrived with a very strong army, and as the Crusaders were facing starvation and increasing enemy pressure, they abandoned the siege on the 28th of July, retreating in disarray. Results. So the Second Crusade was a failure, and after the siege of Damascus had failed, the Second Crusade came to an end. Some believed that it was due to poor leadership from individuals and the lack of support from the Byzantines that caused the failure. However, others and some Westerners believed that it came down to strong Muslim opposition. The Muslims were united and under capable leadership from Nur al-Din. So and especially since the Muslims were defending one of the holiest cities in the Near East, and their determination was really strong. This factor united followers of Islam, and Muslim opposition only grew stronger after this, leading to the Third Crusade. So in the caption, I will attach the links for these 3 videos, which are really useful and you can use if you want a better understanding, but I think I summarized all the key factors and key points for each event in the Second Crusade. And in the next video, I'll be discussing a exam question, paper 2/3 for the Second Crusade. Thank you, hope you enjoyed.